last time, and then maybe one time we can go live. I think that would be cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to thank you again, Miss Oak Leaves and Onions, for coming on the show. I thought we had a great chat last time, and I'm excited to do it again. Miss Oak Leaves and Onions. I'll call you Oak Leaves if that's cool.
That works.
Former stripper.
Yep.
Her channel is about human sexuality, intersexual dynamics. She does book reviews as well. Talks about the red pill. And last chat, we talked about Rollo Tomasi and his Rational Male book series. We talked about a bit of her experience stripping. And you were talking before we started recording. You found a documentary you really liked that you wanted to talk about related to sexuality.
Yeah, I mentioned it in the last video, and I could not remember the name of it at all, so I went and looked it up. I believe it is The Science of Sexual or The Science of Sex Appeal. It was done in 2009 by Discovery, and I think some of the ideas might seem a little bit outdated for people who spend a lot of time reading red pill concepts, but it would be a really good introduction to a lot of red pill ideas for somebody who's unfamiliar with red pill ideas or red pill concepts. It would give them the lay of the land without giving them the idea that they're being fed biased information, which is always kind of helpful.
Okay, and that's The Science of Sex Appeal, right?
Yep.
Okay, and where did you see that initially? Was that just on Netflix, or you were
It
just
was on Netflix several years ago, probably about 2009. And
Yeah.
I watched it and I really liked it. And now, when I was looking it up and kind of seeing clips of it, I was like, well, it's a little dated, but it's not bad. It's still good to give you an idea of just how people kind of operate and some of the things that make us function. Kind of also the idea that we don't know everything that we don't know. There's a lot about human sexuality that we're really good at guessing at, but we don't have it all. We don't have it all yet. So, I think people have a tendency to be discouraged sometimes in the dating market because they're not getting what they want or they're not finding who they want. And part of it is that sexuality is very complicated and very complex, and there are things that are going on under the surface that we're completely unaware of and we have no way of being aware of. And so it's a really good documentary to kind of fill you in on the fact that there's a lot of stuff that's all subtext that we just aren't aware of when it goes on between two people. My favorite example of that is the t-shirt sniffing contest. Women are attracted to the smell of certain men as opposed to other men. And, you're not going to notice that. Nobody on a date is going to be noticing whether or not they're attracted to the smell of the other person, unless they're wearing a very, very strong cologne. So it's very subtle things, and it's a lot of very subtle things that you're never going to, consciously pick up on. And so it's good to kind of be aware that you don't always know everything that's going on. And it's when, for example, a relationship doesn't work out, it might be stuff that was completely out of your control that neither one of you was ever going to know about. And that's not a thing to be discouraged over when it comes to relationships. So that was interesting.
Oh, wow. That's kind of like I don't know what the right word is. It's kind of like a let go philosophy in a way. It's like you're saying there's some relationships that have almost from the beginning an expiration date on it. Because of factors outside of
I wouldn't
their
say
control.
that necessarily. Well, I mean, sometimes, but I wouldn't say that necessarily. I mean, if you're a guy and there's a specific girl, they talk about the one-itis a lot in red pill circles. I mean, if you're a guy and you have that one girl that you're really into and you really, really want to make it work with her, sometimes it just won't work out. And there could be reasons for that really aren't your fault and really aren't her fault. It could be things that we just don't know about. But going back to the t-shirt sniffing things, you might just be genetically not particularly compatible. There's something called an RH factor, which I'm not familiar enough to talk about. in a well-informed way. But basically, if it's either blood types or certain types of genes interact in the wrong way, it's not going to produce healthy offspring, or it's less likely to produce healthy offspring. I know that I had some relatives who they got married and they tried for a baby, and every time they tried for a baby, all their children were born with the same. It was a very, very fatal birth defect, and they never could figure out what it was. I actually talked with that relative a little while ago when I lost my own baby, and she was talking about how they had a bunch of scientists come in and look at it because they had two perfect examples of babies with the same deformity coming from the same parents. They had genetic material from all the relatives available, and they were trying to study what it was that caused this deformity to occur, because it was extremely fatal and both of the babies died very quickly. And they're still studying it even to this day, even though it happened, goodness, a few decades ago at this point, because they're trying to figure out what happened, but something just went wrong. And it was probably a genetic thing, because they were able to reproduce it. Unfortunately, they were able to reproduce the results, which is never what you want to have happen in those circumstances, but they did. So they thinking it was a genetic cause. But human beings are really good at identifying a good potential mate. And there are going to be a lot of factors that are physiological or genetic that we're not going to be consciously aware of. So if a guy is pursuing, that one hot girl who's always been the one he wanted, and he just can't get her to date him, that doesn't mean that all hot girls aren't going to want him. It means that one isn't going to want him. And that one might have a very good reason for not wanting him, which might be completely out of his control. He might just be too genetically similar to her, or, might have the wrong blood type. Like there are little tiny, very minute details that can get in the way of people forming a relationship sometimes. And so I think it's fascinating, and I think it's something that people who are young, who are single, who are trying to get a date should be aware of, because sometimes it really just doesn't work out, and there are factors at play that we're never going to know about, and not knowing the answer is an okay thing sometimes.
Yeah. And do you think that happens a lot, where it's, or something like that does happen? Maybe I just asked that question before, but where it is attributes or factors outside of the couple's control that prevents that.
Well, that's a tricky one.
It's
That's a
kind of
nature
like how
versus
you look
nurture
at.
kind of question.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a deeper
Um,
question, isn't it?
one of the things that might be helpful with that, like going back to the documentary, there was this really fun study, and this is one of the ones that I remember from that documentary that I just loved. I think we should reproduce that little example that they did at cocktail parties. Like every time there's a cocktail party with 20 or more people, what they did was they took 10 men and they took 10 women. They tried to make them as physically non-distinctive as possible, and they gave each of them a number. They stuck it right on their forehead so that they couldn't see it, but everybody else could.
Yeah.
And they allowed them to mingle, and the idea of mingling was to find the highest number and shake hands with that person. And once you shook hands with that person, you were paired off. And then you had to go and stand off in the corner, and it was really interesting, because people tended to go to about their level, but they had to
Yeah.
play around with it a bit first.
Yeah.
And
It's so
so,
fascinating, isn't it?
yeah,
It's like real life, right?
it
And
is.
a little bit, like.
And it was really, really cool. Like I loved that study, however many years ago, like 2009 or whenever that I saw it. I loved that they did that. And I really do think that they should do that in late high school or possibly early college classrooms, for people, just to kind of give them this idea that the sexual marketplace is, you enter into it and you have no idea which number you have on your forehead, and you kind of have to play around with it and get a feel for it and date different people and eventually figure out where you stand.
Yeah.
And so it's hard, but you have to actually just go out there and try. And eventually you kind of figure out where you stand, and eventually you kind of find what you're looking for. And I watched that as I was like, trying to figure out if this was the documentary. I watched that scene again and I was like, yeah, this looks like it. And then I thought, that's 20 people in a room. It's a contained kind of experiment. What happens when you globalize the sexual marketplace? And that's more of what the red pill people are talking about, where suddenly you're not just 20 people in a room or people in a small town or even
Yeah.
people in a couple city blocks. You're all in line. And so,
Do
there
you
is.
think
Mhm.
that? Well, you can finish that thought, and I'll just.
That was pretty much it.
Okay. Do you think that the modern sexual marketplace favors one sex over the other?
Oh, well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by favors. When you're talking about the immediate sexual marketplace, men are at an immediate disadvantage entering into the sexual marketplace. Women tend to, like, if you go back to Rollo Tomasi's work, women peak earlier, men peak later.
Yeah.
And so women have the immediate advantage. And also, men are kind of expected to be the ones to make the first move. So men tend to solicit attention from women, like in, say, Tinder, a lot more than women tend to reach out toward men. So women are immediately inundated with huge numbers of available partners who are all, expressing some sort of interest in them. And so women from the outset, they have it easier. But when it comes to, later on, when women are starting to, as a lot of red pill guys would say, hit the wall, and they still haven't settled on a monogamous partner, suddenly they're at a very distinct disadvantage, and men are able to, be more choosy at that point in their lives.
Yeah.
They've.
Or maybe not even be choosy, but they get to have a more attractive partner than they would otherwise.
Yeah. I've heard guys saying that it's easier for them to date 23-year-olds when they're 30 than when they were 23.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, that's no doubt for sure. But honestly, I think that might be one of the hardest ages to date is 30. But despite that statement, they seem to me like almost like, I don't know, like, especially if they want kids and they don't have kids yet, and they're pretty and they still haven't like settled down. I think those are like the choosiest.
Oh, women at 30 or women at 30 are completely like men at
They,
30 should not necessarily date women at 30.
yeah, I mean, well, they can be, if they don't really realize their own value, right? If they're overestimating themselves, I think that can be very deleterious to them, to where they're like just waiting forever, type of thing.
And that goes back to what you were asking about when you were saying whether or not the globalized sexual marketplace benefits, men more, women more, or gives men more of an advantage or women more of an advantage. It gives women an immediate advantage, but it can very easily hurt them if they assume that this globalized sexual marketplace that hits them on the face, if that's, oh crap, I'm getting an echo. I think that's my phone, actually. I'm sorry. If they get that and they assume that they are able to, tie down like tens because that's what they've seen available to them, and then they carry on that impression that they're a 10 when really they're 5, 6, just average. They can end up in their 30s without a partner, wondering why they can't find a partner, and constantly disappointed because they've had this globalized experience and they think that they can just skim off the top. And so in that way, it's not so good for them.
I think it's a huge, just the perception and self-awareness thing, I think, is something that really changes for, I think, guys and girls, particularly in the transition from high school to university, and particularly if they go to a large university and they're coming from a small high school. This is advantageous to the females and extremely disadvantageous to the guys because, well, at least I think it is. I mean, it depends, of course. There's, I mean, this is a generalization, but like just speaking on my own, my own experience, because that's all I can really share. I had a lot easier time as a freshman in high school than a freshman in college getting attention, I think. But even I think a better way to put it would be like I was just higher up on the totem pole in high school by virtue of the fact that it was a smaller pond. Whereas when you go to university, you're just, a random person, right? A random student, a random male student, no less. And for girls, I think that's way different. Whereas like a mildly cute girl in a small school might have been not actually getting a whole lot of attention from high schoolers when she was in high school, just because of how high school is with cliques and stuff. And, she doesn't even is aware fully of her own value. And then she goes to university and there's this huge disconnect between what her actual value is and what she thinks her value is based on her past experience with how much attention she's gotten from men. So that's a huge, that feels good, obviously, for the girls who experience that. But then for the guys too, it's like, for me, it was like, dang, like, and not just me too. I remember talking to other guys about this too. He was like, this one guy, he was so funny. He was on my dorm room floor my freshman year. He was just the loudest guy. Everybody loved him. And he was saying that he was lamenting that college wasn't like, like a girls gone wild party or something like that. And I'm like, dude, they use that as marketing, and I don't know, it just, like that cognitive dissonance, right? Where it's like, okay, you're a popular jock at your high school of 2000, but if you go to Ann Arbor or University of, Wisconsin or USC, there's like 30,000 students. Like nobody cares, like really, or more, sometimes. So I think that adjustment is really difficult, unique to each person. And in the context of the global marketplace, like Tinder or something like that, it's not quite as transferable or applicable because there's so many more people on the internet than, just in school, or whatever school you're going to.
Yeah. Well, I really wouldn't know because I went to like this small town community college and I didn't stay very long. So I ended up going to college with pretty much everybody that I'd gone to high school with, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I do think that possibly like hitting 18, like the moment a girl turns 18, suddenly everybody who's older than her can start dating her, technically. And so she's going to start getting a lot more, like a massive amount more romantic attention, or at least this is something I noticed when I turned 18. Like before 18, it was basically kids in my high school and, my own age group. After
Yeah.
18, suddenly like 35-year-old men are hitting on me and I'm like, okay, so my
Really?
59-year-old Tai Chi instructor, I was 19 at the time. He tried to get me to sleep with him. I was
Wow.
like,
How did he do that?
well, I started taking Tai Chi lessons and there weren't that many students, and like anytime I was either early for class or late to leave or whatever, he asked me like if I wanted to come out for coffee. And I didn't really have any friends, so I was like, hey, sure, why not? If you're an 18-year-old girl, you're not necessarily immediately expecting that your 59-year-old Tai Chi instructor is going to try hitting on you. And then he started just sort of pushing it from there. So we went out for coffee and he started getting really flirtatious and then more flirtatious. And eventually I just had to quit Tai Chi. So that did not last. That did not take a long time. I think I stayed in Tai Chi for less than a month and he started moving really fast and not subtle at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of this sudden avalanche of male attention that can kind of hit a girl when she turns 18. And she'll
Yeah.
probably be noticing that like if she goes to a university all of a sudden, because that's
Oh yeah.
18, that's right there.
Oh yeah. And they go, I think anybody who goes from like having not very much power to having a lot more power relatively in a short matter of time, it makes him go a little power mad a little bit, you know.
Yeah. I
But
was I was oblivious to it. Like I was so oblivious to it in high school. I remember I was in it was in one of the hallways, and our high school had multiple floors, so I was going down the stairs, and some guy on the top floor started literally singing to me at the top of his lungs in the middle of the hallway in the high school. And I remember just looking at it like you're a loud nuisance and I don't know what you're up to. Just kind of kept going. I was completely clueless. My parents, when I was a little girl, told me, you can't date until you turn 18. So I just looked at it. I was like, okay, so this dating thing isn't going to be a problem until after my 18th birthday. So I ignored it, and I had no idea what was going on.
that's funny. Oh man.
I accidentally cock blocked other students without having an idea that they were trying to like get together with girls, and I was clueless. Like I was completely oblivious to it. I was just kind of
Yeah.
blindly stumbling the halls of my high school, like with no idea.
Wow, that's funny. You seem introverted to me.
Very,
Yeah.
very. I had my own things I was working on in high school, and I don't think a lot of people actually knew what all was going on in high school. I was actually in my last video, I promised to make a video about like my just growing up because I had an unusual childhood. And
Hmm.
so I'm going to be doing that at some point, and that's going to be interesting and weird. And probably, I don't know who's going to actually watch that thing, but it's probably going to be titled something like My Messed Up Childhood or something, because I had, I had too many other things going on to actually even remotely care about sex. And the only time I really noticed anything about sex or sexuality as a high school student, it was just like other people's attention to it and other people's constant obsession over it. And eventually I realized that talking about it was a way to maintain conversations with people who were otherwise completely uninterested in my life. And so I would talk about sexual stuff with other people. They get all fluttery about it. I'd be like, this is a great way to have a conversation with folks. That was kind of me in the strip club too, talking about sex with people who were really interested in it and being kind of like, this is an excellent way to have conversations with folks.
Yeah, I bet you the guys in the strip club like that too,
Mm.
talking about sex with their dancer.
Oh yeah, that's a great way to make money. Great way to make money.
Spicing up those tips a little bit.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, like, I think all young strippers do that.
Hmm.
And I remember, like, the really, really new strippers. There was one in particular who was talking about, like, she was just going on and on about it. And it was funny because she was talking about all the guys she slept with. And she made the mistake, I think a lot of young dancers do, where she was just sleeping with every guy she met. Like, anybody who was remotely attractive or interesting. And so she was talking about, like, all these military guys she'd been with, like, just one after the other, after the other, after the other. I was just thinking, like, girl, you're going to wear out in, like, a couple months at the rate you're going. Like, this can't be healthy. Um, but that was what she was going on about. And I remembered, I didn't give her a hard time for it because I remember when I was a brand new dancer, I tried to make it sound like in conversation, I tried to make it sound like I slept with like half the town. Like anytime I was talking with a guy, I wanted to sound as available and, interested as possible. And so I would talk like just a raging promiscuous slut. And I mean, the truth is I was kind of exaggerating, shall we say? But, I wanted the money, so I kept going. I kind of mellowed out as the years passed, and as I had been dancing over time, it was kind of like, okay, you don't need to sound like you've been the village bicycle to convince a guy that you're, ready and willing. Like they kind of get that idea just by the fact that you're running around in lingerie. They just assume it. They pick it up, and so you smile, you make eye contact, and they do the rest for themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if I've met a girl who's really that impressive with dirty talking.
I've never been good at it. I've never
Yeah,
been good at it at all.
girls
I know
don't
some
have to be good at it.
dancers. I
They
know
don't have
some
to be good
dancers
with
are.
their words.
Oh, they have to be like dancers who are good at it make so much more money. And so I
Yeah.
know girls. I knew one girl. I think I mentioned her last time. Like she had like $2,500 after one night with one customer. She was slightly overweight. Like she was an overweight dancer, but she probably had a very dirty mouth. Like, it's a bit conversation wise, not to be assumed for any kind of like, she didn't do anything illegal, shall we say, but
Yeah, I understand.
yeah, she had a probably was very, very good with her words. I was never that good. I just kind of came bouncing up to people, being happy and friendly, and that was enough to get me a $25 dance here and a $25 dance there, and it worked. Some women, like, I don't know. I should probably go back to a strip club.
Do they
I should
have
probably go back to a
retirement
strip club and get
plans?
a dance from somebody just to hear what they have to say.
What
Um,
compared to like what how you used to dance, or is that what you're
well, I
saying?
mean, I've been retired for way too many years now. When I was younger, before I met my husband, my plan was I'll wait until I turn about 28 ish, and then I want to become a welder. And so I was gonna take like welding classes, unless welding just wasn't really
Welder.
my thing. And then I was gonna do something else. Like, I didn't really know at that point, just whatever seemed interesting. I mean, I worked on an ambulance before I became a dancer, so I was kind of like, it's not like there's stuff. It's not like there's not stuff that I can do. I just need to figure out whatever it is I'm interested in doing and then just go do that thing. And that was kind of my attitude when I was like 23. And people would ask me, well, what are you going to do when you're 30 and you're not pretty anymore? Which I thought was kind of funny because, women don't necessarily stop being pretty at 30. They just have to work a little harder. Um, but I just looked at it and I was like, well, whatever I want. I'll do
It's kind
whatever
of
I
a
want.
rude question.
I mean, the guy was drunk and he was high on a bunch of cocaine when he asked me, so I kind of just took it in stride.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he didn't
Good
like my
way to do it.
answer. He didn't like my answer at all because I was like, I'll just do whatever I want to do. And he was like, well, I mean, seriously. And I was like, I am serious. Like, the world is a fascinating place. I'll find something that's interesting and I'll just go do that thing.
This guy sounds like he's trying to be your dad or something.
He was really high on cocaine. At that point in time, I was in New Orleans and I wasn't taking the best care of myself. And I had worked the entire night up until closing and I hadn't eaten anything. And
Oh,
I
that's
didn't
the word.
realize up until that point that I hadn't eaten anything. And so my blood sugar was plummeting and I was starting to get dizzy and, just feeling really not so good about myself, like not clear headed at all.
Yeah.
And the place where I was staying, of course, they locked their kitchens at night because there was a lot of drugs in that area. It was New Orleans. And so this guy who was already drunk told me that he was going to walk me to the best hamburger place in all of New Orleans. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. You take me there. I don't even care about my safety. Just get me somewhere where there's food. And so he took me to his room first. He took me to his room first and did a couple lines of cocaine because, of course, in New Orleans, everybody was doing cocaine. And then I started walking across the streets of New Orleans in the middle of the night, like at 2 a.m., with a total stranger from the hostel that I was staying at, who I knew was drunk and high on cocaine. He, true to his word, he took me to this really excellent burger joint. I had this lovely burger with like mushrooms and blue cheese, and then he took me to some sort of jazz place, and we listened to music for a little while, and then he took me back home. So
Oh, what
that was
a
awesome.
very gentleman cokehead.
Very gentleman cokehead. I've actually had really good luck with like the cokeheads in New Orleans, at least. Now I was
Nice cokeheads.
paranoid. Yeah, nice cokeheads. Like the time that I was in the bathroom and all the women were doing coke.
Yeah.
Like I finally got into a bathroom stall and I closed the door behind me and I sat down and I'm like, okay, that was weird. And then all of a sudden I hear, excuse me, and I look up and this gal is peering over the stall because she's got like 12-inch heels on, so of course she can look over the door of the stall. And she's like, excuse me, I was so rude. I forgot to ask, did you want some? And I was like, no, no, thank you. I'm good. Thank you. So she's like, okay, more for me. And she just disappeared like back behind the stall door.
It sounds like it's like a TV show or a movie scene or something. Girl
It's
goes into the bathroom and gets offered coke very politely.
very
But
politely, very politely.
so you were staying at a hostel while you were stripping in New
I
Orleans?
was, I was staying at
Wow.
this like really lowbrow hostel. I think it was like 15 or $30 a night. I think it was 15 because I was in a bunk. I was in this room with a bunch of bunk beds with a bunch of other women. And then one time I came in because I was traveling, and so I would hop over to that hostel and I just show up at the place and be like, "Hey, do you got a place for me to stay?" One time they were all full up at the girls in the girls like bunk room, and so they let me sleep in the men's bunk room, and so I was sleeping in a bunk bed in a room with like eight, like let's see, one, two, three, four, like five other bunk beds, so nine other men and me in this room at night alone together.
Oh,
And they were such gentlemen. It was always so funny to me because they were absolute gentlemen. Like they were so very careful. Like they were trying to make me as comfortable as possible because, you know, they had a lady with them. And I mean, they all knew what I did for a living. So I hear women complaining about how rude men are. And it's like, I don't always buy into it because so many of my experiences with men, they're usually like with a total stranger, they're usually very polite. And you meet like every once in a while, you'll meet one who's really, really rude and he stands out because he's really, really rude. But most of the time, I've had just really good, very positive experiences with guys. Like if you're cool and you're mellow, they don't have a problem with you and you don't have a problem with them. At least for me, that's been the case in
yeah.
most of my experiences.
Cool. Yeah, I just you mentioned that you were at a hostel. I was like, wow, you were really kind of roughing it there for a
Oh
bit.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, when I was in, I talked about this in a video, and I was not smart. I didn't title a video. I spent a weekend or a week in Seattle with a murderer, but I spent a week in Seattle with a murderer. I gave it some sort of other title, like my first time in a big city or something. I went to Seattle by myself. It was my first time out of my little tiny, you know, safe hometown. It was my first time in a big city. I went to the library there because the library I'd heard was beautiful, and it was quite beautiful. I met a guy there who was twice my age, and he and I ended up, he offered to give me a tour of the city. And I said, you know, what the hell, sure. I was really kind of cautious and wary at first, but he did actually give me a tour of the city, which was very pleasant. As I got to know him more, as we ended up walking all around Seattle for the next like several days, I knew that he'd probably spent some time in jail, but I didn't know why.
Why did you think that?
Um, he seemed very hard. He had a he had very hard eyes. That was the first thing I noticed about him. He was a flute teacher. Like you would think a flute teacher would be safe, right? I met his students, so I know he was a flute teacher, but he was also homeless, and he was telling me sometimes that he slept on the streets. He had very hard eyes, like very. I don't entirely know how to explain it, but very hard. Um, and then every once in a while, he would mention things about prison or things about jail, which made me suspect that he had actually had time in jail. And he also had those very, very hard eyes. He seemed like a very hardened human being. He was very polite to me, but he had this very hard side to him. And one time we went out for a coffee. It was like the middle of the night, but we both love coffee, so we're drinking nonstop. And he took me to this little diner, and I'm sitting there with a hamburger and a cup of like diner coffee. And he looks at me, and he's got this very speculative look on his face, very, you know, just sizing me up. And then all of a sudden he says, so the first time I killed somebody, I was 14 years old, and I'm just sitting there, you know, I have my coffee in my hand. Whoop, I have my coffee in my hand. I'm just kind of sipping it, like hiding my face and sipping my coffee and trying to look extremely relaxed as he tells me about the first time he killed somebody. And yeah, he was 14 years old. And I'm pretty certain it was not the only person he killed. He seemed extremely relaxed about killing people. He was a cutthroat, like a literal, honest to goodness cutthroat. Um, and you would think that I would have, you know, politely excused myself and ran away screaming, but I ultimately ended up spending like many more days with the guy, just hanging out, walking around Seattle, just kind of. There was no one to talk to that I knew, so I was hanging out with him.
He
Like,
was too alpha to resist.
no, no, like you would think. Like I had a boyfriend and I knew I needed to eventually move to a city. Like I knew that relationship was not going to last forever, but I liked my boyfriend. He was very committed to our hometown. He never wanted to leave. But, you know,
Wow.
you know, he was, well, I was attached to him. He was an alcoholic and he was a complete basket case, but I was attached to him. And so in Seattle, when I'm talking with this, murderer, he was twice my age. He was 42. He was homeless. He was, I just wasn't particularly impressed by him at all, but it was good to have someone to talk to because it's nice to have another human being around. And I was extremely socially isolated in my hometown, so I didn't have people to hang around and talk to.
Isn't it amazing how open people are with complete strangers? Like when you're traveling,
Oh yeah,
it's
yeah.
so amazing.
It's fun. It is very fun. Like that was one of the wonderful things about New Orleans. That was one of the wonderful things about strip clubs. Like you can meet a person in a strip club and they'll tell you like their deepest, darkest secrets. And honestly, you can tell them your deepest, darkest secrets too.
Yeah,
And if you're having a fun conversation, you can just keep going like that for quite a while. And it's you can learn fascinating things about people, about what they think about the world, about experiences that they've had that you never would have, heard about from another person in your own
yeah.
like social circle.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's great. I love it. It's probably my favorite part about going to new places
Makes
is
sense.
is talking to the people and um, yeah, it's amazing too. It's one thing I learned too. Is you ask somebody a question or two and they just talk and talk, and they just you can tell like I don't know. It seems like almost everybody you see in public they just have this or like when they meet a stranger they like really want to share their story with them.
Yeah.
It's like a universal thing I've noticed. It's almost universal. Very rarely do you find someone who doesn't actually like talking about themselves, because everybody kind of says they don't, but in
Yeah.
reality, I think almost everybody does like talking about themselves.
Makes
So yeah, I
sense.
think it's just a funny and very interesting quirk and observation about humans that I've garnered while traveling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes a lot of sense about humans too, because I mean, if you're meeting a stranger, you want to have that exchange of information, like who are you, what are you all about, as quickly as possible. So I bet I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some sort of instinctive like reason for it, because you do have to size each other up relatively quickly when you meet a stranger. And I mean, I'm sure that was something that was even more important in previous periods of time when strangers were not as commonly encountered. It's like, is
Yeah,
this person dangerous? Is this person safe? Are they friendly? Are they going to be beneficial to me? So you're just asking all of these questions and you're also trying to pick up all this information. And if you meet someone who's friendly, the first thing they're going to want to do is show you that they're friendly. And so, you're going to want to also do that as well when you meet someone.
yeah, and you do it in a matter of seconds. Really, it's literally like a second or two that people make that decision where it's like, do I trust this person or do I not? And
Yeah.
some people, and it's kind of scary, but it's like people can good at hypnotizing other people and like swindling them and tricking them. Like I saw this, you just made me think of a short documentary or video I saw about Ed Kemper, who was this guy. He was like 6'9". His IQ was like 140 or 130 or something like that. And he was a serial killer. And he says he remembered one time he was picking two girls up, and the one girl was with it right away to get a ride from him because he would give him rides. And well, and then you know what he would do.
Mm.
But he looked at his watch, like briefly. He had his hand on the steering wheel,
Yeah.
and she was like, "Yeah, are you gonna get in or something?" He said his spiel, and then he looked at his watch as if he was in a hurry,
Oh,
and he says that he thinks that's the reason that the second one made the decision to come in the car because she didn't look like she wanted to get in. So
oh,
because of that, it's almost like he made it look like he was just doing this act of kindness absent-mindedly as opposed to that's the whole reason he's there. So I think we do make these decisions or assessments of people within a matter of seconds when you first meet them in public, and depending on the context of, do I want to continue this conversation or not really, and do I trust, does this person make me feel at ease or make me feel suspicious, right? So
Yeah.
very interesting. Yeah.
Well, that was actually it's interesting you mentioned that because that was one of the things about the murder in Seattle that I think made me feel safer with him. Honestly, when I first met him, we were both sitting outside the library. It was a very safe public place. It was very clean. Like Seattle, when I went there over a decade ago, oh God, it was a very clean place and it was a very clean area in front of the library. And so I felt pretty safe there. And he was sitting there waiting too, and he strikes up a conversation with me and he starts telling me this story. And I listened to it, and it was a story about nothing. Like, it was a very dumb story. And I was listening to him, I got the feeling like he was talking me up to gauge whether or not I was agreeable enough to just kind of go along with it. And I liked that feeling, like that moment with him, because I was kind of like, okay, he's not as bright as he thinks he is. He's kind of trying to see how far he can pull me in. He can't pull me in as far as he thinks he can. He's underestimating me. I'm probably going to be okay. And so then, I got to know that he was a flute teacher. I was like, okay, flute teacher is pretty harmless. And then, like, I started figuring out pretty quickly. Like, he offered me a tour of the city. I looked at it, was like, okay, well, the first couple blocks are pretty clean. So if he starts doing anything suspicious, I know I'm okay to turn around and run in the other direction. And it's a clean place. There are cops around here. It's not like a crime infested kind of area right in this spot. So if he starts taking me somewhere I don't want to go, I should be safe to run. And so as we're walking, I'm kind of keeping an eye on my surroundings and looking at it as like, okay, this is safe. This is safe. This looks good. There's a cop over there. This looks good. And, I started noticing some of these harder aspects of him, the hardness of his eyes, some of the things he was saying. It seemed like he was maybe hadn't always led the nicest kind of lifestyle in his past. He was extremely committed to karma. And, he was trying to make his karma right. He was trying to get right with, those powers that be. He had an incredibly simplistic worldview. And I felt safe around him because I was reasonably certain that I was smarter than he was, which didn't make him it didn't make him less unpredictable and dangerous, because humans are unpredictable and dangerous. But if he was actively trying to manipulate me, I was reasonably certain I'd be able to pick up on it. For whatever
Okay.
good that's worth.
Yeah. No, you can definitely. It's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but yeah, I think you can definitely gauge that sometimes with certain people, whether it's like, someone you just met or not, where it's like maybe it's not necessarily a function of intelligence, although I think it usually is. Sometimes people are just good actors or bad actors too. So there's that.
He
Yeah,
was.
I've had that same thought though about some people, but I'm rarely in a situation like that where it's like you have to assess someone's trustworthiness to that level of penalty, really.
That was kind of a very habitual thing for me, because the strip clubs, I constantly had to be kind of vigilant around people. I saw
Yeah,
people, robbing other dancers. I saw people.
dancers robbing other dancers.
Oh, well, that happened, yes, but I saw customers stealing from dancers as well.
Really, just
Yeah.
like going through their purses and stuff. Or?
Well, yeah, actually, I've got a video if you want to hear the long version. But there was a woman who brought a purse in, sold it to one of the dancers. It was a very big, gaudy purse. So she walks in, she's carrying it. It's very obvious. She sold it to one of the dancers. The dancer put all her money and her gear in, and then the lady just walked past her, picked up the purse, walked out. It was the same purse she come in with, so nobody questioned it. She got all that dancer's money for the night. Like, that happened one time. I remember it was the club in New Orleans. Now, New Orleans was a very dark place. And the club that I was working at was, it was, it was not technically a brothel, but it was sort of like a brothel. I remember when I got hired there, I thought it was a brothel. Like, I was like, this place is definitely shady. But I remember there was a girl who went up on stage on one of my last. It was my very last night there. That was the point where I just kind of like I was fed up with it. I didn't want to go back. She went up on stage. She was in a hurry. She was running late, so she just ran up stage, She forgot her purse in the changing room, and when she came back into the changing room, her purse was gone.
Oh wow.
And it was only other dancers had access back there.
Oh my goodness.
And so that was the fun. That was the last time that I danced there. But I remember we all had to open up our lockers and rifle through all of our stuff and dump out our purses. And I was traveling, so I traveled light, and so I was able to do it in like 5 seconds, and I was
Yeah.
done. And there were girls who like practically lived at the strip club, and they're like pulling like old like food, like deteriorating food, like rotten like old dinners out of the
Yeah.
backs of their lockers, and like
Oh my goodness.
snacks and things, and like piles and piles of clothes. And our manager, like, she wasn't the greatest manager, but I really liked her. She had a great personality. She was really sweet. She just didn't have good business sense, and so that's one of the reasons the club was kind of shady. But I remember her looking at one of these girls and being like, "Oh, seriously? Like, when do you ever clean this stuff?"
Yeah, right. One of those people that lives at work, seemingly.
Yeah, but they never found the purse. And I ended up giving like a bunch of the money that I had made that night to that girl just because I felt bad for her, because she was really bummed out. It was a really slow night. It was supposed to be a busy night, but poor management, bad advertising, just a lot of different factors. And eventually I was like, there's no point in me coming back here. So I just left.
Okay. I want to ask you about something that's not related to men or women or sex. What do you think of the pandemic and everything that's been going on? And what state are you into? If you could give that context.
I've been trying to keep it kind of vague. I'm in the
Sure.
South.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
I've been trying to avoid actually talking about any of that because I've got some beliefs and opinions. But I looked at it a long time ago, like early on when I was starting the channel. It's like, if I talk about politics, like, I'm already polarizing enough. I've had an abortion. I'm talking about sex. I kind of want to just keep it there and leave
Okay,
it.
that's fine.
Which probably isn't the answer you want to hear. And I've
No, not
kind
at
of
all.
tried watching some of your videos, and they're interesting. I just, for me personally, like, I'll talk to anybody. Like, that's cool. I know that for myself, though, I don't ever want to say anything and then get quoted in the future. Like, that's
And
my
then
worst
get
nightmare.
quoted.
And then be quoted in the future.
Oh, okay,
Um,
like out of context or something.
out of context, but also, like, it's just, I'm talking about stuff that people are uncomfortable enough about anyway. And I don't want, like, I want anybody from any political background to hear what I have to say and be able to learn from it, or learn other materials from it if I'm doing book reviews, like figure out whether or not it's a good book, without feeling like they need to take sides in the political battle, or any aspect of the political battle, because I think that that's something that happens too often, too readily. And I have friends on both sides of the fence. I have friends who are really annoyed by COVID. I have friends who are terrified of COVID. And they're all people that I like.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't want anything to interfere with my being able to communicate ideas. And I'm afraid that ultimately that might eventually interfere with my ability to communicate ideas, especially since politics has become so, it's just gotten into everything. Like, I remember there was a guy who had a
Yeah.
cooking channel. He had to do a special video saying that one of the recipes that he'd made on his cooking channel had nothing to do with politics. It was just a recipe on his cooking channel. It was a good recipe. It
Wow.
was tasty, so he cooked it. And it's like, when it gets to that degree, it's like, it's just become too much.
Yeah, I agree. Do you think? Well, okay, that's fine. Well, off camera, I'll bring something up.
Certainly, definitely ask me off camera. Like, I feel bad about it. It's not the greatest answer. It's not the fun answer, but
Yeah.
it's the safe answer. And so, there you go.
Maybe
For what
next
it's worth.
time we'll have some luck with it. But we still got a bit of time left, so I wanted to ask some more questions. I guess, how long were you stripping for? Like, how many years?
8 years.
8 years total. Okay, so
Yep.
you have kids now.
Yep.
So you're a mom.
I'm, yep, stay-at-home mom. And
Okay.
that's my job these days.
Okay.
Um,
Excellent.
it's kind of funny. Like, I don't think I've actually mentioned this really in any of my videos. Like, people who do the math can figure it out, but I did continue dancing after I met my husband for several years. And I continued dancing while I was pregnant with our first child. And then after I had our first child, I continued dancing for a little while. It wasn't until I had our second child that it was kind of like, he came to me, he's like, maybe it's time to just quit and stay at home and be mom. And that was really, really difficult for me, actually, like incredibly difficult for me to let go of the job because there were so many things that I had, like so many parts of my life that I had tied into that job. And
Okay.
so that was kind of hard and weird for me, but yeah. It ended up being a good thing. I wasn't as cranky and tired, and I was able to kind of focus more on being a mom to the kids. And then
Yeah.
I stopped dancing for a while. Like I abandoned the pole. Like I've got a pole at home. I stopped dancing on that for a while, and then I lost all my flexibility, which is really, really sad because I miss it.
I'm sure you'll get it back pretty quickly if you start stretching again.
It's been a while. It's the one thing that I have not yet been able to replace about being a dancer that I really miss. Um, I would go into work and I would spend the entire evening working out, and it was pretty intense workouts. There was a lot of, I suppose you could say, I've seen people compare pole dancing to like a mixture of yoga with weightlifting. Um, I tend to look at it as being very similar to like high intensity interval training because you get called on stage and you're there for a very short period of time, but you're trying to do as many pole dances and as much intense working out as possible. But the kind of workout you can get in a strip club, there's just like for me, there's no comparison.
Hmm.
I was incredibly healthy, incredibly fit. I used to get the zoomies. Like it was so fun because like I was so muscular and I was so fit and I was so flexible that I couldn't sit still. And so I was constantly like stretching or moving or adjusting. And sometimes if I got bored at work, I would go over, flip myself upside down, and then do push-ups against the wall, like upside down push-ups. Um, just because I had so much energy, I was constantly burning. And now I'm like a couch potato, and it's like, what happens to me? Like, I still haven't entirely replaced that level of activity. Like, I remember the first time I tried to stop dancing, I got very bored very quickly, and then I started climbing trees. And I would like go out into the woods and I would find like big tall trees that just went straight up with no branches protruding from them. And if you've ever watched a bear climb a tree, like I just grab on, pull myself up, grab with my legs and pull myself up, and I would climb up and down trees. Like I get like scratches all over me from the bark and everything. And I did that because I needed to burn energy. Um,
When was that period? When did you do that? That tree
the,
climb?
the first time I tried quitting pole dancing, I was like 23-ish, 24-ish, like probably 24-ish.
Oh wow.
And my husband and I, like we decided he was going to pay the bills for a while. Like I'd been paying the bills as a dancer because he had just moved to town and he didn't really have a job set up for himself. Like he had temp work, but not an actual job. And so we I kind of quit for a while, and he took over, earning the money. And I was trying to do the stay at home thing, and there wasn't a lot for me to do, and I was really bored, and I am one of those people who kind of, I'm a lot saner and a lot more mentally healthy when I work out regularly.
Yeah, I think that's everybody.
I think that is everybody, but for me, it's like particularly noticeable.
Oh
Like I'm
no, yeah,
just so
I
aware of
got
it.
you. I got you.
Like I get depressed and anxious if I am not working out regularly, and so I just have to. And I know so many people who don't work out, who don't understand like why I'm so addicted to it. And it's like I just want to feel good. Like
Yeah.
that's it. Um, but yeah, there was like I think it was about a month before we gave up on that. Like there were a bunch of other things. Like we had just moved to this one place that we were staying at, and that living arrangement wasn't working out for us, and so we moved back to where we had been. Um, and I really, really, really missed my job. And when I quit the second time, like when I quit for good, I still really, really, really missed my job. Even to this day, I really miss my job. And, I'm 33 now, so it's kind of, I'm settling into the reality that I can't go back to work.
Well, we got
But
our age.
yeah, the age issue. And, There you go.
Well, isn't there like a demand for MILF strippers? So you could fulfill that, right?
I knew women who were strippers who were literally grandmothers,
Wow.
and more than one. Um, but for me, it's like we've got the kids. The kids are in school now. One of these days, even the YouTube channel that I have where I talk about being a dancer is kind of pushing the edges of my husband's comfort zone because he's like, you're leaving a digital footprint. It lasts forever. Anything that you say on here is going to follow you for the rest of your life and is going to follow your kids. And it's like, well, yes. And so I'm not going to do anything particularly risque on my channel, but at the same time, like this is kind of who I am and what I'm about. I
Yeah.
talk about sex. That's kind of it. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be lewd or, particularly lascivious about it. It's just, this was my life for a long time. This was a huge part of my life for a very long time. And
Yeah.
it was huge for reasons that I don't think it's usually, it doesn't always, not every woman who goes into a strip club goes into a strip club for the reasons I went into a strip club. And so for me, it was a much bigger deal, I think, than it was for your average stripper. Like your average stripper probably wants the attention, probably wants the money. Me, it was about this huge and very radical lifestyle change that I was undergoing at that time, and this massive improvement to the quality of my life on so many different levels because of it. And so, I mean, it was really hard to give up because it was the point at which I stopped being miserable all the time in my life, and I started becoming a happy person, a healthy person, a functional member of society. And so it meant a lot more to me, I think, in that regard. So,
Why? What could you explain that a little bit more? Why it was multidimensional for you? Uh,
well,
Going and becoming a stripper, other than just the money and the attention, which I'm sure you liked.
I mean, it was the money. The money was fun. Like the first night I danced, I expected my goal was to make $10. I went into a strip club. I was like, I am not pretty, particularly compared to what I had imagined strippers were going to be like. Like I thought they would look like movie stars or something, or like you imagine strippers to look. And in my hometown, in particular, they definitely didn't, especially in that club.
Yeah, there's definitely a spectrum.
Yeah, and
They don't all
so
look the same.
no, and I mean that club, it was a small town strip club, and it was like there were two strip clubs in that town. This was the low end strip club, and so like all the women were in their mid to late 30s, and they were overweight. So I stood out right away. I didn't realize that was going to happen at all. So I come in there and I'm like, okay, I'm not as pretty as I probably should be. I don't know anything about makeup. My hair is too short. I'm a little
Your hair was
overweight.
short then too?
Actually, my hair's kind of done this weird thing. At that point in time, it was close to this length, honestly. Um, Shortly before, like I cut my hair, oof, right before I started my YouTube channel. My hair was down to my butt. I did actually grow it out at multiple points in my life. In my wedding pictures, my hair was down to lowish on my waist. And so when I got married, I just had flowing hair everywhere. And it was weird because I look at my wedding pictures and I look kind of like this weird kind of midget because I just had hair everywhere. And so I was short to begin with. And then I had hair all over the place. And the hair was so long that it made me look even shorter.
Oh, are you
And so
are you pretty short, girl?
I'm a little bit on the small side. I'm only 5'3", which is not like midget, but it
Yeah,
is small. It is
that's
very
yeah.
small.
You are petite, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, with 6-inch heels, that's actually a good thing because then I can meet guys at eye level and I'm not taller than them.
Hmm.
And if there ever was a guy that I was taller than, the first thing I did was take off my shoes and stand flat-footed so that I could show them how very petite I was next to them. Because, girls are attracted to taller men, and so I wanted to make sure that they knew that I was, shorter than they were.
Yeah, that's funny. I,
Um,
I don't know why I do this thing where I talk to people on my YouTube channel and I get this like my brain does this thing where I like match a height to their face
oh,
and I'm always wrong. I don't know why I would think there was a correlation between those two things, but I was like thought you were like a really tall girl. Like I don't know why that came
Itty
to me.
bitty.
But you're a small girl.
Very itty
Yeah, that's
bitty.
good. Petite. We like petite here, so that's totally cool. But I interrupted you as you were finishing up your story there.
I got lost. I lost my train of thought. But I know you were talking about the multidimensional one. Yes, the money,
Yeah, that
right.
was the question.
I came in, I wanted to make $10. I was like, okay, overweight, hair's too short, don't know anything about makeup, all this stuff. I made about $300 ish on my first set. I can't remember the exact number at this point.
Oh,
Not
wow.
first set, first night.
Mm.
I came home. I was staying with my parents because I was living in another town working on the ambulance there. A paycheck on that ambulance was about $270.
Bi-weekly?
Biweekly, yes.
Oh wow.
And so
Wow.
like I mean they don't pay EMTs very well. Like the people who come and save your life when you're having a horrible life-threatening emergency, just remember those people are not being paid well.
Yeah.
And I mean it was a small town, so they had a small town budget, so that probably affected things. But I was getting $10 an hour, and then on top of that, like they were taking a bunch of money out for malpractice insurance and whatnot. So taxes, malpractice, all that. Eventually, you end up with not a lot of money, like $7 and some cents an hour. And I made about 300 ish on my first night. And I called up one of my friends and I went over to his house. And I didn't have that many friends. So he was basically one of the only friends in the world that I had to, that I could call a friend. But I knew he was up because he was a night owl like me. Went over to his house, walked into his living room, took this grocery bag that was just full of money, flipped it upside down, and dumped money all over his floor. And I just looked at it and I looked at him and I was like, what the hell happened? Like, this far exceeds my wildest expectations. I'd made over a paycheck in one night and I had no idea how. Like,
Yeah.
I
Especially I mean, it sounds like you're from I think you said you're from a pretty small town.
very
And
rural.
if you're from a place where an EMT is making 270 bi-weekly, that means the cost of living is quite low and wages are probably low too. So just
Yeah.
even some more context for people for $300 a night for a teenager is a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, I was 21. Like, they wouldn't let me go into the
Oh
club
yeah,
until I turned
21-year-old.
21,
Oh yeah, that's right.
which
Sure.
I was really bitter about because I had that many more years that I had to sit
Still
around
though,
and wait.
I mean, I would say for most 20-year-olds, that's a lot of money. Like
Well,
for one day.
my first apartment, just to give you some context, was $250 a month.
Yeah.
So, like,
That's wow, that's insane.
yeah,
250?
yeah. And then
Wow.
my alcoholic boyfriend that I mentioned, like I mentioned that I was attached to a guy back home. His rent was $300 a month. And he had this
Wow.
huge apartment, like it was this basement apartment. It was massive. Like it was just massive. It had so many rooms and a huge, just sprawled out apartments. $300 a month. And it was all his. Like
That's
it was just
amazing.
a small place.
Yeah, I lived in Madison, Wisconsin, where I was paying, I mean, to get a studio there, you need at least eight or $900. And yeah, and living abroad too, living in cities, you miss or you forget that how cheap, rent can be in rural places and the like in the States. But yeah, we are 3 minutes past our hour here. I just want
Oh,
to thank you for chatting with me again, as the British say, again, Miss Oak Leaves and Onions. And if you want to make this a regular thing, I think I would be super excited to do that. I don't know how often you'd be willing to chat with me, but I really enjoy it. And I know my subscribers really did too last time, whoever watched. The views were there, but not as much commenting as usual. But the likes were there too. So
awesome.
yeah, good feedback.
Awesome. Well, yeah, this is fun. This is the second time we've done this, and both of them have been really fun experiences. So I'd love to do this again.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. And I have a podcast too that I run with I'm actually in Buffalo, New York right now with my YouTube colleague and mentor slash friend, Shrimp Zoo. And we run a podcast too. It's called the Pandemic Podcast. So you're invited, but we would probably have to talk about something that's somewhat
Yes, we're not supposed to
geopolitical.
talk about.
Yeah,
Uh,
if you want, the offer's there. Otherwise, we can keep it strictly psychology and sociology and intersexual dynamics. But that offer is there if you want it. So
thank you, thank you.
thanks everybody for listening tonight. I will put Miss Oakley's and Onions links in the description box. Did you have any final plugs or asks, requests of the audience before we sign off tonight?
Not really. I'm just gonna keep doing my thing. Eventually, I will be making that video. Actually, that would probably answer your question better. Anything the video about my childhood to kind of give some context on why the strip club was such a big deal for me. So if anybody's interested in that, like, just it's gonna take a couple weeks, but it will be out eventually.
Okay, definitely. So keep on the lookout for that video as well from Miss Oak Leaves and Onions. Thanks for tuning in tonight, this morning, wherever you are, folks. And stay frosty, and we will see you all next time.